I should turn to the situation now in South Korea, where pressure is growing on President Yoon to stand down. Opposition parties have submitted a motion to impeach him after he tried to declare military rule. Well, let's get more on that with our security and defence analyst, Professor Michael Clarke. Professor Clarke, great to have you. So why is South Korea such a politically sensitive place?
Yeah, Kamali, you've only got to just look at the map to realise that South Korea is in a very interesting part of the world. There's the Korean Peninsula, and this is the demarcation zone, the DMZ, between North and South Korea. This is roughly the 38th parallel, and this is a Second World War designation. The Russian forces moved down to the 38th, the Allied forces moved up to the 38th, and that was just an administrative border. But during the Cold War, of course, the North then, under Russian influence, became communist, and the South, under American influence, became liberal, well, became free world, but with some dictatorships, but is now very much a liberal democracy since 1980. And that's the peninsula. And twice as many people lived in the North as the South. The North invaded the South in June 1950, and the Korean War went all the way, the Northern forces went all the way down to the South, to Busan, as it then was called. The United Nations then launched a counterattack in the north. They went all the way back. They went all the way up to the Yalu River, and Allied forces occupied the whole of Korea. And then at Christmas 1950, the Chinese invaded across the Yalu River, and it all came back down to the 38th parallel. And that's where, since 1953, they have been since. And the legacy of that war is still very much with it, including the fact that Seoul, capital of South Korea, is only about 10 or 12 kilometres from the border. The North Koreans have got enormous artillery, thousands and thousands of artillery tubes and rockets this side of the border. They could devastate Seoul very quickly just with their artillery. The Americans have got a big base in South Korea, of course. They've got a big army presence there, about 29,000 troops, and a big naval base at Busan, as it's now called. And that naval base is very important to the United States. They keep a lot of different ships there. This is the Kentucky, which is there this year. That's one of the nuclear ships. It's one of the nuclear weapon ships, or the bombers, as they call, with Trident missiles on board. The Americans have got 12 or 13 of them. Whether they carry any weapons when they're in Busan, I rather doubt, but it's one of their strategic nuclear forces. And, of course, they have aircraft carriers that go in and out, and they have the F-18 Super Hornets. You see plenty of those in South Korea and over the area. There's a Super Hornet. You see lots of those flying around if you're anywhere in the Korean Peninsula. So it's a very sensitive place out of history and because of where it is now within the whole Asia-Pacific region.
Michael, why does the crisis then matter more widely in the region?
Well, it matters because of the way the region is becoming more tense. And in a sense, when we look at Pacific Asia, you see the difference between the North and the South. I mean, in the North, as far as the Western world is concerned, the three great democracies are South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan. And they're all pretty important to Western power projection, American power projection, and to the ideological difference which the West has with, of course, communist China and autocratic Russia, which are just on the mainland. So in the North, these countries really matter. And these are well within what the Chinese take to be the inner island chain, the first island chain, which for them runs from Japan right down to the Philippines. And the Chinese say that they want dominance inside that first island chain. And in the South China Sea, there's a line here called the 9-dash line, which the Chinese have drawn with 9 dashes on it, and they claim sovereignty over that part of the South China Sea. And that, of course, includes the territorial waters of Vietnam and the Philippines and Malaysia and Brunei. And so the Chinese have picked quarrels over the sovereignty of all of the tiny islands, the Spratly Islands, Mischief Reef, Fiery Cross Reef. All of the islands here, Paracel Islands, are real trouble spots in the making because the Chinese are fortifying coral reefs, assuming that they're theirs, and they're not. They don't belong to anybody, or they're disputed. And they're creating military bases all around the South China Sea. So this is a very sensitive area. Different dynamics in the north to the south, but all of the dynamics are moving in the direction of tension and militarized confrontation.